the Divorced Girl Smiling Podcast with your host, Jackie Pilosoff.
No one should have to go through a divorce feeling alone and isolated. That's why I created the Divorced Girl Smiling Podcast. Every show is 30 minutes, and the guests are my Divorced Girl Smiling trusted professionals. They're so wonderful. Financial advisors, divorce attorneys, mediators, divorce coaches, therapists, and more. We talk about every subject that you can even think of having to do with divorce. The podcast is meant to empower you and inspire you and make you feel really, really confident so that you can have a good divorce outcome and a great post-divorce life. You can find the Divorced Girl Smiling Podcast pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found, and always at divorcedgirlsmiling.com. So grab a cup of coffee or a glass of wine and start smiling. Before we get started, I want to tell you about two Divorced Girl Smiling trusted professionals who I think are wonderful. The first one is Jessica Zajura, who is a divorce attorney and the founder of Zajura Family Law in Maryland. Jessica has been a family law attorney for 15 years, and she blends fierce advocacy with a deep dedication to fairness and the best possible post-divorce outcome for her clients. That might mean litigation, that might mean mediation or negotiation, but either way, Jessica is committed to empowering her clients, protecting children, and providing the tools for families to move on in a healthy way. Love Jessica, and she's a really, really good attorney. If you want to learn more, you can find her on her website, which is zajurafamilylaw.com. I also want to tell you about Debbie Cohen, who is a divorce attorney in Chicago and the suburbs. She's the founder of Cohen Law, and Debbie is caring, compassionate, and non-judgmental. That is the environment she's created for her clients. But Debbie is truly warm and caring and compassionate, but she's also a fierce advocate for her clients, both in mediation and in litigation. Love Debbie, and I truly, truly trust her. If you want to learn more, you can find her at cohenfamilylawyer.com, and you can find both Debbie and Jessica in the Trusted Professional section of Divorced Girl Smiling. I believe that every divorce is difficult and complicated and sad, and there's all these different emotions. But what happens when you get remarried and then you get divorced again? So today I want to talk about second divorces. I want to talk about how they're different than if you're just going through a divorce. And I want to offer advice to people going through a second divorce. And some of the things that can happen when you're going through a second divorce are that you feel really embarrassed, or you feel like people are judging you. Oh, she's getting divorced again, which we're going to talk about why you should not feel that way at all. How you might be financially worse off, or maybe it's not going to affect your finances. And then we'll talk about stepchildren and how that can be really difficult to not have any contact with them, or you don't know what the relationship is going to be like moving forward. So my guest in this episode is divorce attorney Megan Beck. Megan has been a divorce attorney for several years. She started out in Chicago, and now she's in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where she grew up. So she moved back home and has been practicing there for many, many years. And Megan also went through a divorce and is remarried. And so this is going to be such an interesting conversation. Hi, Megan.
Hi there.
Thanks so much for taking time to be here and to talk about second divorce.
Well, you're welcome. It's a common thing.
Okay, so I want to tell my listeners that Megan really is good for this podcast, because I talked to this real estate agent in Tulsa recently, and she was telling me that in Oklahoma, there's like much more divorce than anywhere in the country. I mean, I don't know if it's the number one state for the most divorces, but for some reason, there's a lot of divorce in Oklahoma. So there's probably a lot of second divorces. And Megan told me before this podcast that she's talked to people who are going through their third and fourth divorce. All right. So tell me, Megan, what is it like when you get calls from people who are like, "Hi, I'd like to talk to you. I'm going through a divorce. This is actually my second divorce." What do they say?
Um, Usually, I mean, they can fall in one of two categories. Typically, the first marriage was pretty short, and so it was less of investment than the second marriage. So they're pretty emotional. The second marriage, is typically the one where they built a bigger life, had children, that sort of thing, and so the typical scenario is they're pretty emotional. The other kind of box that people fit into is, their first marriage was the one where they had the kids, built the financial life, um, got divorced, kind of got remarried maybe a little bit too soon, realized that they made a mistake and are ready to get divorced. Those people are a little bit more calm in the situation. They know a little bit more like what to expect, and they just come to me and are like, "Okay, how do I unravel this?" So those are really the two categories that I see for the most part.
Makes a lot of sense. So, don't you feel like, though, the ones who it was a short marriage, and sometimes I call that a mulligan. I'm like, "Oh, don't
Yeah,
worry about it. It was like a mulligan."
yeah, that's a good
Um,
way.
don't you feel like, though, they're embarrassed? They're like, "Oh, I can't believe everyone is gonna know that I'm divorced again, and I'm embarrassed, and I feel like people are judging me." What do you say to them?
You're right. That is really the common response or the common thing that they tell me. And I tell them not to worry about it. That really the decisions that you make for your personal life and the first year and a half, 2 years after your divorce really aren't the most sound ones. So had they ended their last marriage with me, I would have told them, hey, take this time to figure out who you are post divorce. Don't rush into a relationship. Certainly don't rush into a marriage. Figure out what hobbies you like, what who you are as a single person. Whoever they had before me did not tell them that, and that's why they got remarried. So I think a mulligan is really the best word for it because it is. It's like a freebie, and oops.
And
Um,
also, like, I tell people ask me all the time, like, "Oh, but I'm so in love." And I say, "Look, no one's telling you you have to be alone. Be with this guy for 5 years and then get remarried." Or at least, like, if you say 5 years, maybe they'll wait four. Like,
right,
just don't do it. There's no reason to get married. Because why would you wanna take that risk so soon? But let's just not even talk about that because people who are listening to this already got remarried. So it's
right,
okay, though,
right.
is what we're saying. And, I actually dated someone shortly after my divorce for, like, 5 years, and if he would have asked me to marry him, I would be divorced twice, and so I just got lucky. So it's not your fault. You did what you thought was right at the time. Let's talk about how you're going to get through this second divorce, have a good outcome, and have a happy life moving forward. Okay.
Right.
Other things about a second divorce is somebody might be financially worse off because maybe it's a guy who now has to pay two alimonies or two child supports. Tell me about those cases.
Well, it kind of depends on the jurisdiction you're in, obviously. But if you're marriage and if you're in Oklahoma, for example, and your marriage is relatively short, your second one, the alimony exposure isn't quite as large. The longer term the marriage, the more likely you're going to be given, granted support alimony. So the financial piece can be really stressful because people often leave divorces in a rebuilding state. And so to have to rebuild twice can be super stressful to people for sure. I just try to be really transparent and let them know exactly what it's going to look like from a property division, child support, alimony perspective so that they know. Um, and there are no surprises. The good part is if people have been through a divorce before and have had financial obligations that have stemmed from the divorce, like alimony or child support, they at least know what to expect on some level. And that helps.
That is, when you know what to expect, it does make everything easier.
Yeah.
But before we even continue, I want to tell people if you're getting divorced for the second time and you're like, oh, I can't believe it. What's everyone going to think? Instead of focusing on that, I would say focus on the fact that you're getting out of a toxic situation and you're gonna be free again. And it's
Sure.
gonna be the best feeling because life is way too short to live unhappily and just have too much pride to say, "I'm not gonna be divorced again." Just get out of it, pay what you have to pay, and move on because you're gonna be so relieved and happy. I mean, that's how I felt when I got out of a long-term relationship. I was just I felt terrible about breaking up, and it had been so long, it was kind of like a marriage, but I felt so free and I felt so happy. And you know what? 2 months later, completely unexpected, is when I started dating my now partner of 10 years. So, and I never thought I could be that happy. So, I want to tell people listening, better times ahead. Let's just talk about how to get you out of this so you could be
Right.
free and move on in a happy way. Okay, tell me about stepchildren. Like, let's say somebody gets remarried. Now they have these stepchildren. What happens? Do you not talk to the people anymore? Is every case different? How do you talk to the kids? How do you get out of that? And have a relationship with them if you still want that and they do.
Sure. Being a step parent is probably the hardest role that anybody has to take on, in a marriage. And there's oftentimes quite a bit of bonding that occurs between the child and a step parent. Unfortunately, step parents in most jurisdictions, if not all, don't have any rights to their stepchildren. And that can be really devastating. And the decision as to whether that relationship continues lies entirely with the actual custodial parents. So, you know, if parents can be mature and see that there is a strong bond between a former step parent and a child, oftentimes they will allow that relationship to continue on some level. I've seen it happen, where the former step parent, continues to support the child at sporting events, extracurriculars, take them to dinner, that sort of thing. I haven't seen anything where like a step parent gets to have a child for a weekend here and there. That's just not been something that I've seen. I've seen the other side too, where there's been a complete just cutting off of that relationship between the child and a step parent. And the step parent is absolutely devastated. I assume the child is probably devastated as well, but that's not a side that I really get to see. Um, and there's no recourse. It's just kind of the way that it is. And, that child will have to wait until they're older in order to have a relationship with the former step parent. The good news is most kids have phones these days and can, keep up some contact on their own, but there's no right, a step parent right to a continuation of the relationship. And I think that that's one particularly devastating piece of second marriages when there are step kids involved.
Okay, well, I have a thought that might solve that problem, believe it or not.
Okay.
Wanna get into it, but we have to go to a break, and then we'll get into that. You're listening to the Divorced Girl Smiling podcast. My name is Jackie Pilosoff, and I'm your host. Today, I'm here with divorce attorney Megan Beck. She's out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. And if you want to learn more, you can find her on her website, which is meganbecklaw.com. You can call her, have a consult, or just look on her site. And Megan and I are talking about second divorces. We'll be right back. When we come back, I'm going to tell you what I think about this whole stepchildren issue. We'll be right back. I want to tell you about two Divorced Girl Smiling trusted professionals who I think are wonderful. The first one is Ellen Feldman and Brian James, who are divorce mediators for CEL and Associates. I have known Ellen and Brian for I'm going to say 15 years, and I can tell you firsthand, they have a great reputation. They've been working together since 2007. And when you mediate, you get both of them in the session, which is wonderful because they have very different backgrounds. Ellen is a former litigation attorney, not a divorce lawyer, but a litigator. And Brian is a parenting coordinator. So the two of them together are wonderful. They co-mediate and you get the benefit of having both of them. If you want to learn more about Ellen and Brian, you can find them on their website at celandassociates.com. I also want to tell you about a wonderful real estate agent if you live in Minnesota. Her name is Shannon Lindstrom, and she's a CDRE, Certified Divorce Real Estate Expert. And Shannon is so passionate and dedicated to helping people facing divorce in selling and or buying a home, either during the divorce or after the divorce. She's been doing this for a long time. She works with Remax Results. I just love Shannon, love her energy, and she's extremely experienced. If you want to learn more, you can find her at mndivorcerealestateexpert.squarespace.com. And you can find both CEL and Shannon in the Trusted Professional section of Divorced Girl Smiling. Welcome back to the Divorced Girl Smiling podcast. My name is Jackie Pilosoff, and I'm your host. And today we're talking about second divorces. And, this is a great podcast, even for if you're going through your first divorce. I mean, it's not really just for second divorces, because there's a lot of things we're saying here that could help you if this is your first divorce. My guest is Megan Beck, divorce attorney out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. I want to tell everyone it's funny because I live in Chicago, and Megan used to work for one of the best firms in Chicago. It's a huge, well-known, well-respected firm. She had all of her training there, took what she learned, came back to Tulsa where she grew up, opened up a practice. And so Megan is like getting a big firm, but it's just her. So if you're looking for that singular attorney, more personalized experience without the excessive billing. Sorry, I couldn't help it. She's a great attorney for you, and you're getting that kind of attorney as well. Okay, Megan and I are talking about second divorces, and before we took the break, we were talking about stepchildren, and I have to say, I would think it would be heartbreaking. Now, I am somebody who has been with the same person for 10 years. My kids basically grew up with him. If we broke up now, it would be heartbreaking to my children because they really do. They have a relationship with their father, but this is like someone who really is like a father figure to them as well. Now, if somebody is getting divorced, they have no legal recourse about seeing the stepkids. But how about mediation? How about if you go in and you say, "This is so important to me," and maybe the person who's the custodial parent, like the natural parent, maybe in mediation, those conversations look a lot different, and they'll say, "Well, if you wanna take the kids out for dinner, every week, it's okay with me." I mean, that is the beauty of mediating instead of this cold-hearted litigation where everything's decided by a judge. What do you think?
I think that that's a great concept. The only problem is that in this second divorce, that particular court, even if you reach an agreement, doesn't have jurisdiction or authority to make any binding orders related to the children that are not of that marriage.
So
So
so you're telling me that you can't put it in a divorce agreement that the person has visitation with the kids, like, once every week or 2? You can't do that?
not in that second divorce, no. Now, if you had two really great first divorced parent, the actual biological custodial parents of this child wanted to really go the extra mile and create something binding within their divorce case, they could probably enter perhaps some sort of agreed order that provided the visitation. That would be legally binding. Again, though, it's there's a lot of enforceability questions related to that because that divorce court for the first divorced set of parents doesn't have jurisdiction or authority over the step parent. So it's all really it gets kind of hairy in the
It
process.
does. I
Um,
can see that.
so I mean, I think people can create really nice agreements between themselves, but there aren't any teeth behind them. And also keep in mind that anything that this second divorcing couple does has to be, as it relates to some children, has to be also agreed to by the other custodial parent. Um, because they just, have a say into who their kids have contact with.
Well, it I would say if I had to give advice to people listening who are going through a second divorce, maybe you're thinking to yourself, I know so and so loves my kids, and I'm so mad at him, and he cheated or whatever, and this situation is so bad, he will never see my kids again. Just stop and ask yourself, is that what your kids really want?
Right.
Really have to dig deep here and put your feelings semi aside. Not that you should forget that he cheated or abused you. Well, if there's physical abuse, then forget it.
Right.
You should not let your kids see it.
Right.
But if
Right.
it's emotional and you feel like everything was not fair and you can't not stand this man, if you feel like your kids love him and your kids are safe with him, I would say to really dig deep here, don't do that to your kids if you don't have to, because they're feeling the loss maybe more than you because you're so angry and ready to be away from this toxicity, but maybe
Mhm.
their relationship was great.
Right. Right. People can be excellent parents and terrible spouses. All the time. People can be, excellent spouses and terrible parents. Again, I think one of the helpful things in today's technology-based culture is, kids having access to their own, devices to have continued contact. So maybe you don't want to have contact with your ex-husband, but it's okay if they, text and, have phone calls here and there and kind of have their relationship on their terms, and see where it goes.
Okay, you just brought something up that made me think about another aspect of this. If someone's going through a second divorce, maybe the kids are so happy. And the reason for second divorce, I would say one of the biggest reasons for second divorce is that the two people rushed into it and the kids weren't happy and they were forced together and they had
Mhm.
this instant step family and they couldn't stand it. And there's so much resentment. And then his kids start treating you like crap. Your kids start treating him like crap. There's all this drama that leads to divorce, and people think that they're gonna get remarried and become like the Brady Bunch, and it just doesn't happen.
Right. Blended families are so hard, so hard. And I will say, I mean, I think that blended family issues are a chief cause for second divorces, and not just the blended insular family, but the former spouses and the drama that they cause for the new spouses and within the blended family. So the kids may be ecstatic. The divorce may be what's best for them. You're right.
100%. I think that's actually more the case than the kids would be really sad unless they're, like, really young kids,
Right.
or something like that.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
so let's talk about the legal aspects of second divorce, which I'm sure are similar to first divorce. If you can only tell us Oklahoma law, but splitting of the assets, premarital assets, is it all just the same as the first divorce? And if so, tell us the basic principles.
It's exactly the same as the first divorce, at least in terms of property division. The court doesn't take any account of what happened before, in a prior divorce. The definitions for marital property and separate property are the same, and they have to be divided fairly and equitably, the same way that they would if it was a first divorce. One interesting kind of nuance or caveat, though, is oftentimes people sort of learn a lesson after their first divorce and they have a prenup for their second divorce. And that can define the division of assets and debts, pretty significantly. But that would be the only difference.
Okay, what is the percentage of people who you've had clients second divorce that have prenups versus don't, if you had to guess?
Probably still only like 20%.
That's what
And
I
I
was
mean,
gonna
yeah,
say.
about 20%. And it really depends on where they are in life. If they're older, then yes. But a lot of people are still feeling pretty romantic in their 30s and 40s and don't have one and aren't thinking about the practical pieces of, their futures. So it's
Because her
normal.
heart is so happy, and you're
Mhm.
thinking, "Now I get to be happy, and this is my happily ever after," and believe me, I'm the biggest romantic, I wish that was true, but the reality is you have to plan ahead because you never know,
Right.
and I'm not saying this to rub this into anybody listening, because if you're listening, you're probably like, "Well, Jackie, it's too late for that." Okay.
Yeah.
But what I wanna say is before my current partner and I moved in together, we had to sit down and kind of put on paper who was paying for what,
Mhm.
how this was gonna work, what we were gonna do if we split up, and it was really awkward, and we had already been together for 7 years, and we were still, like, gaga over each other. But the reality is we felt so much better. Like, I would say have a glass of wine so you're, like, relaxed, and just sit down and say, like, "I know this is awkward, but let's talk about who's paying for what. Are we splitting the rent? Here's what I make, here's what you make." You gotta really get deep into it so that there's no built up resentment, and that's kinda what causes these second divorces or third divorce. So if you're listening to this and you have a significant other, this is the kind of stuff you can do to increase your chances of having your marriage work.
Right. I mean, most people who are getting divorced for a second time are a little bit more established financially and career-wise than they were the first time. And so transparency is key. I always tell people, if you're not going to do a prenup, at least sit down and be like, this is how much I make. You can show a tax return. This is what I have, like a snapshot of your net worth. And then decide how you're going to pay the monthly living expenses. Some people, allocate, I'm going to pay this, I'm going to pay this. Other families fund a joint account for what they define as joint expenses and do it that way. There are a lot of different ways to do it, but I think sitting down and having that conversation beforehand, almost like a business meeting type format,
Right.
um, is really helpful. And I know people who've done it in a therapist's office and that sort of thing, just as to feel like a little bit more comfortable in what is really an unromantic, awkward, subject matter area. But if you start out with that kind of foundation, then you've solved a lot of problems before they started, I find.
And you might need to update it. Maybe a year or 2 goes by and now things are different. Someone lost their job or someone starts making a lot more money or the expenses change or you guys
Right.
decide you wanna move or, some
You
kid
have a
one's
kid.
kid is going to college or
Right.
you're having a baby. Yeah, do it again.
Right.
So, we all love this fantasy of like, "Oh, we're a family, it doesn't really matter," but the reality is that after divorce, it does
Yes.
matter.
It does matter. And, I think especially in situations where there are children from a prior marriage, the new spouse may not be super invested in those kids' expenses, at the get-go. Things might evolve and they might want to, contribute to kid-related expenses after a while, but not at first. And so, I think being really transparent as to how these step kid expenses are going to be paid and who's paying what really does ward off a lot of problems, and just really good communication is
And I'm
key.
so glad you said that about the kids because I feel like people are hurt. They're like, "Oh, well, doesn't he love my kids enough to want to pay for everything?" What you have to remember is that person has their own, they might have their own kids, they have their own divorces, they might still be paying their ex. And so you really have to not take it personally,
Right.
and you really have to keep that open line of communication going. So I
Right.
guess.
Especially if that person doesn't have any children, chances are, and this has been my experience, they don't really know how much it costs to raise kids. And sure, the parent involved is getting child support, but as any child support recipient knows, that barely makes a dent in what it costs to raise kids with all their activities and stuff that they have these days. And so, once that step parent learns what it costs and becomes more invested in the kids, I have seen them make the financial investment as well. It just takes a little bit, but it can be hurtful.
Megan, I can't believe we're out of time. This went by so
It did.
fast. Want to ask you one final question to leave the listeners with a positive outlook. When people get divorced for the second time, when it's done, how do they feel?
Relief, relief. And I'm hopeful that, they kind of learn from the first experience. Like, let's just be single a little bit and figure out what we really want in our lives to potentially avoid a third, fourth later, however
And
many more
it
divorces.
doesn't mean that we don't want you to find love and be with someone forever. It's just that marriage is very complicated and we all have these like light hearts and romantic instincts, and we all want this fairy tale. And I guess what I'm saying is you can be happy without making it legal. That's just
Great. Yes.
so on that note, I want to tell my listeners, if you want to learn more about Megan or have a consultation, I say she's my go-to Tulsa attorney. You can find her at meganbecklaw.com. You can also find her at divorcedgirlsmiling.com in the trusted professional section. And you can also go to divorcedgirlsmiling.com to find other trusted, vetted divorce professionals, mediators, financial advisors, therapists, real estate agents, divorce coaches, and more. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. Thanks, Megan, so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
And we will talk to you all real soon.